I chose to research and present about Charlotte Towle. Some basic facts about her. She lived from 1896 to 1966. She was an educator and a practitioner. She published Common Human Needs in 1945, for which she might be most known due to the controversy of socialism in that publication. And she developed the field of psychiatric social work, which had previously been sort of a radical idea. She really brought it into the mainstream of social work. Charlotte Towle was born and raised in Butte, Montana. Because of this, she observed the labor struggles as Butte was a mining area and was part of the industrialization of America. She also observed class stratification as her mother always wanted and perpetually tried to move them away from Butte and towards more stable and civilized areas, but their father kept them in Butte. She attended Goucher College. This speaks to the women's rights available at that time, as World War I and general progression of society encouraged women to become self-reliant and independent. During her time at Goucher, she was an active volunteer at the Red Cross and National Prisoners Aid Association. In the broader societal framework, this shows how charity work was beginning to move from relief to the prevention of poverty. And people's ideas of what charity work should look like were changing drastically at this time. While she was at Goucher, she admired her feminist professors who advocated for women's suffrage, but she was never part of a visible women's suffrage movement. And I think this speaks a lot to her personality, as through much of her career she believed in radical ideas to a certain point, but yet remained fairly professional. After graduating, she was hired as a caseworker with the Red Cross. She was no longer a volunteer and she was paid for this position, which also speaks to the growing number of other young women in social work who were being paid rather than having volunteer status. They're working in hospitals, in schools, and for the government. During this position, she learned about psychiatric literature and really developed her passion for mental illness at this time. In the field of social work, specialization versus generalization, that debate was becoming more frequent and loud, and many believed that specializing in psychiatric or other forms of social work was the next step to professionalization. While Towle initially believed in this, later in her career she advocated for a generalist approach with integration of various fields. After leaving the Red Cross, she accepted a few other positions and ultimately joined the child guidance movement, which drew from the theories and studies of Freud and behaviorism, implying that those in poverty it was not because they were morally deficient, it was as a result of their environment and upbringing more than anything else, which was a huge change from previous thoughts about poverty. Throughout her career, she was also a proponent of a client-centered approach, which was fairly radical for this time. Charlotte eventually became professor at University of Chicago, as their faculty and staff had noticed her specialization in mental illness and wanted to bring her onto the faculty to grow their psychiatric social work program. So she developed and eventually took over the psychiatric social work program at University of Chicago, and she was a teacher and developed case curriculum for generalist perspective. She also learned about methodology related to the government, whereas previously she had learned it in relation to private agencies. And this was a great time to learn about it because the New Deal legislation was coming to fruition. In 1945, she published Common Human Needs, and it was scandalous because even though the government had requested that she write it to assist them, another government agency took a few of the sentences out of context and generally proclaimed it as socialist and banned the book. It was rectified a few years later and republished with the questionable sentences edited. But it just goes to show how no one was really safe from the Red Scare at that time. Even Towle, who was fairly professional and stuck with the mainstream ideals of social work. Throughout her career, there was a noted lack of racial or gender equality, which was fairly normative for these times. Overall, Charlotte is most known for developing a generalist casework curriculum and improving the theories of the training and education of social workers to avoid the tight specialization and to promote more of a overarching generalist approach which draws on many fields including psychology and psychiatry, which she united with social work in her writings and teachings. She was a very big advocate for psychoanalysis within social work as well. So although she's most known for her Common Needs scandal, she was a very well-published author and did a lot to progress social work's integration with psychology and psychiatry. Thank you for listening.